The Tigers of Tagarthy. Dear friends, this is the story The Tigers of Tagarthy. In the forests of Tagarthy, Karnataka, India, were once home to an abundance of tigers. However, in the 1930s, a series of man-eating tiger attacks began to terrorize the local population. The authorities were desperate to find a solution, and they turned to British hunter Kenneth Anderson for help. Kenneth Anderson was called upon to deal with a series of man-eating tiger attacks in the forests of Tagarthy. When Anderson arrived in Tagarthy, he was met by a group of terrified villagers who told him stories of the man-eating tigers. The tigers had killed over a dozen people in recent months, and the villagers were living in constant fear. Anderson knew that he had a difficult task ahead of him. The forests of Tagarthy were vast and dense, and the tigers were elusive. However, Anderson was determined to succeed. He spent weeks tracking the tigers, and he slowly began to learn their habits. Anderson found the village of Tagarthy to have no less than 4 tigers operating in the area, and on one single day 8 cattle kills were reported to have been made by tigers. Anderson recounts his own close encounters with the tigers of the region, including the story of how local man Shamrao Baput comes to shoot one of these tigers in his garden, and Anderson's own hunt for the hostile, cattle-lifting tiger of Guja. If you travel to the western limits of the district of Shimoga in the state of Mysore, you will at once be struck by the difference of scenery from that prevailing around Bangalore and the eastern parts of the state, for here you are within the belt of evergreen forests, fed by torrential monsoon rains, averaging above 120 inches a year west of Shimoga town itself and reaching over 250 inches at the village of Agum, the extreme limit of Mysore state on the western Ghats. Giant trees, their leafy tops reaching to high heaven, and colossal tree ferns, grow along the numerous streams that gush from forest and glen and border the roadside with a perennial supply of fresh water. Vegetation of the rankest description, among which the thorny varieties of the jungles of central and eastern South India are conspicuous by their absence, is to be seen everywhere. But little wandering in these jungles is possible, for trails do not exist, since the undergrowth densely covers every open space and struggles ever upward to reach a ray of sunshine. Beneath the towering trees everything is damp and dark, the chirp of the wood cricket and croak of the bullfrog are the only sound you will hear. Leeches, their bodies attached to the undersides of leaves, stretch out elastically to fasten a grip on any living creature that may brush by. They will penetrate your clothing, worm their way between the interstices of your boots, puttees, or stockings, and suck your blood without your being aware of their presence, for they give you no pain until, looking downwards, you will find some part of yourself oozing blood. Attempt to pull them off, and they will leave a nasty wound that generally festers into a sore. Apply a little of the common salt you should always carry on your person in these parts, or a little tobacco juice, and they will curl up and fall off of their own accord. The wound will then heal without any attention. This is the home of the hamadryad or king cobra, Nyahana, as he is known, that giant snake of the cobra family that reaches a length of 15 feet and more. Dark olive green in color, with faint yellowish white circles around his body, he boasts of no visible mark on his dark, oval hood. Of amazing speed despite his great length, he feeds on other snakes, is aggressive and is said to attack on sight, a female guarding her young being reputed to be particularly bad-tempered. I have twice met the king cobra on his own grounds, once when collecting specimens for an aquarium of the beautiful red and green fish, spotted along their sides, which inhabit the forest streams outside Agum, and on another occasion, when out collecting orchids. But at neither time did they behave aggressively. Both specimens stopped upon seeing me, raised their heads about 4 feet above ground and partly extended their oval hoods while gazing at me attentively and inquisitively with their beady black eyes. Then they harmlessly glided on their way. The higher treetops are the homes of beautiful orchids, the stick-shaped branches of the dendrobium family being particularly represented. In summer their clusters of pink, yellow, white or mauve blooms festoon the higher terraces in colorful array. This district embraces the Shiravati River, whose waters fall gracefully and grandiosely in 4 distinct streams, a sheer 950 feet at the falls of Jersapa or Jog. Here, on a moonlight night, can be seen that rare phenomenon against the steaming spray of the waters a rainbow by moon. The village of Tagarthy, 11 miles southeast of the little town of Sagar, is situated on the eastern limits of the evergreen forests, where they have been felled and cultivation has been undertaken. Because of the heavy rainfall and fertile earth, agricultural ventures in this area are extremely profitable. The grass also grows lusciously on the more open glades, and vast herds of cattle are kept in the bordering villages and hamlets, due to the abundant grazing. Relatively few wild animals, beyond bison, inhabit the evergreen forests, owing to the denseness of the undergrowth and the presence of leeches and ticks, which annoy them. For the same reason, and due to the scarcity of game, carnivora are seldom encountered in those dark places. But as the area opens out, and the vast herds of cattle appear, carnivora collect in large numbers to feed on them and grow fat. Tagarthy was such an area, and at no one time in all my many visits were there less than 4 separate tigers in permanent residence. In February 1939, the peak figure of my experience was reached, with 8 cattle killed in one day at various points of the compass around Tagarthy. This indicated 8 separate tigers operating, since the kills were reported from widely distant places. Due to the number of tigers in the locality, panthers are rarely met with, the 1 or 2 eking out their existence doing so in the immediate vicinity of the villages, and living on dogs, goats, and sometimes domestic fowls. For the tiger does not tolerate his smaller cousin and will without compunction kill and occasionally eat him, if the panther gets within striking distance. Except for spotted deer, game is comparatively scarce around Tagarthy, and the tigers in that area are mainly cattle lifters. Most of them are heavily built animals and lacking the sleek, trim appearance of the true game killer. Let me tell you the story of Shamrao Baput of Tagarthy, and of the tiger that he shot in his garden, quite close to his house. Shamrao was but a lad at the time, about 22 years, but as the sole male heir, he managed the estate that surrounded his home with efficiency and with the true love of an agriculturist. Rice grew in the lower, muddy areas, while the dry crop of ragi was cultivated on higher levels. He also had a grove of areca and coconut palms, up the stems of which clambered the beetle leaf vine. Moreover, Shamrao had cattle and other livestock, and indeed was a prosperous landlord. One day a fat tiger decided to share in this prosperity and commenced killing Shamrao's herd, one by one. Shamrao possessed a smoothbore gun and nothing else, and loaded with ball, sat over the kills for the tiger's return. But for one reason or other this never happened, till it came to be surmised this particular tiger was an old hand, who had probably been shot at before and therefore would not return to his kill a second time. And then the tiger grew bolder. One dark night it leapt the fence surrounding Shamrao's garden and attempted to dislodge the stout bamboo screen that had been closely drawn across the entrance to the cattle shed. Shamrao had wakened at hearing the restless snorting and stamping of his cattle. He had then detected a scratching sound and going outside met the tiger as it leapt away after having tried to force an entrance. The next night Shamrao placed small cut branches on the roof of his cattle shed, where he lay prone on his stomach, 6 feet above the ground at the entrance to his shed. This entrance had been closed. At 10 o'clock the tiger presented itself and began scratching the door. Shamrao fired both barrels of his smooth bore at point-blank range, and the marauder sank almost noiselessly to earth. He was a fine example of the heavy type of cattle-killing tiger. The scene changes. It was 11:30 a.m. and the sun shone brilliantly down on the little forest bungalow, situated some 2.5 miles from Tagarthy itself. Early lunch was nearly ready, and my wife was busy with the few finishing touches. Just then a kakar voiced his grating call from the forest that bordered the bungalow fencing. Again and again the call was repeated, the excited note of the small deer betraying his intense alarm. Slipping on a pair of rubber boots and carrying the rifle, I crossed the forest fireline and penetrated the leafy depths of the jungle. The kakar was still calling and I went forward as fast as was possible, making the minimum of noise. I came upon a clearing, in the midst of which stood the little kakar facing away from me and voicing his intermittent bark. Slipping back into the jungle, I tiptoed around the clearing, careful not to place myself within the direct vision of the alarmed deer. Some teak trees had been planted here and their huge leaves, dry and brittle at this season, lay where they had fallen, carpeting the forest floor. I knew that to attempt to cross them would be to give myself away, so I hid behind the trunk of a stout fig tree, growing on the edge of the teak, and strove to penetrate the shadows under them. Stare as I could, for a while I saw nothing. Then a little distance away something stirred, and in doing so, gave itself away. I focused my eyes on the spot, and there I saw a tiger, lying unconcernedly on his back, all 4 feet in the air and apparently fast asleep. Periodically, the tip of his tail would twitch, and it was this movement that had caught my eye and betrayed his presence. It would have been unsportsmanlike to shoot the animal in his sleep. Besides, he was doing no harm beyond killing his lawful food, and so I was not disposed to cause him any hurt. I leant my rifle against the tree and myself also, and for quite 20 minutes I watched that tiger sound asleep on his back. And then, from the forest lodge floated my wife's voice, calling me for lunch. The tiger heard it and sat up, turning his head towards the sound, his eyes still half closed with sleep. Silently I stepped from concealment, the rifle ready for all eventualities. The tiger heard me, leapt to his feet and whisked around to gaze in blank surprise at this human, who had come so close to him undiscovered. Then, with a lazy snarl, he began to walk casually away. I let him go peacefully, and soon he was lost to sight. On another occasion my wife and I had hired a bullock cart, and had gone out at night shining torches, to see what we could see. We had traveled a mile and were halfway down a deep declivity, where the cart track crossed a stream, when she picked up a pair of eyes reflecting her torch beam, deep in the jungle, to our right. Halting our cart, we dismounted, she leading the way with the torch, with me behind with the rifle. The eyes had disappeared, so we followed a narrow footpath that led at an angle in the general direction of the spot where the eyes had been. Shortly we picked them up again, large reddish-white orbs, glowing distinctly against the background of night. Fortunately, the undergrowth was thin just there, and we were able to advance directly towards the eyes. A few steps further and out stepped a tiger, who looked at us and then back at the place from which it had just emerged. The mystery of this strange behavior was soon unraveled, for 2 cubs, the size of retrievers, broke cover and gamboled up to their mother. She now crossed call to lost and gazed at us fixedly a few moments and then into the jungle, uttering a low mewing sound, the cubs to follow. They did so, and the trio were the forest except for the rustle of the undergrowth that occasionally marked their progress through the bushes. My wife kept her torch beam in the general direction where we could hear them moving, for fear that the tigress, resenting our intrusion, should change her mind and launch a flank attack. Then we both heard a distinct growl before us. Turning the beam towards this new sound, we were shaken at seeing another tiger, this time a large male, at almost the spot where the tigress had stood a few seconds before. Quite evidently, we had come upon a family party returning from quenching their thirst at the stream. I might observe that it is quite unusual, however, for a male tiger to accompany a tigress with cubs of the size we had just seen. Generally, she will not trust her offspring near her lord till they are fairly well grown. The situation was now decidedly tense, as there was every possibility of one or other adult animal attacking us. My wife kept her head with commendable calmness, however, and the tiger, growling in a low tone, followed his family into the undergrowth. At that time occurred an amusing sequel to the story, which might have had an unpleasant ending but happily did not. The unfortunate cart driver, left alone in the dark, had heard the mewing of the tigress followed by the growl of her mate. Perhaps his bullocks then scented them, or even saw them, for suddenly they bolted with the cart, to rush pell-mell down into the bed of the stream, where the wheels stuck fast in the soft sand and water. Hearing the shouts of the cartman, and thinking he or his bulls had been attacked, we ran to the spot, to discover all was well except for the severe fright he had received. We were both glad that circumstances had not forced us to harm any of the members of that happy family party. For some time my friend, Dr. Stanley of the Mysore Medical Service, was stationed by his department at Tagarthy, principally to attempt to stem the tide of malaria, which was rife and affecting practically every one of the inhabitants. The doctor was an enterprising man, keen on shooting, and has shot quite a few tigers during his service. Late one night he received a maternity call from a hamlet called Bulunder, about 6 miles away. True to his profession, he set forth by bullock cart, armed with his bag of medicines, injections, and bandages. His Jekko smooth bore and a 5-cell torch added a touch of shakar to his duty. They were traversing an intervening valley when a tiger leapt across the track, and sitting on its haunches by the wayside, turned to watch the passing cart. Stanley fired ball at the animal, which received the lead with a loud roar and disappeared. Calmly he went on to his destination, relieved the mother of her baby, and spent the rest of the night with the patient, returning next morning with a small boy of his acquaintance to help him and the cartman to follow up the tiger he had wounded the night before. Coming to the spot, they soon picked up a blood trail, which they began to follow, the cartman turning back to his cart on the plea he could not leave his bullocks alone. Stanley and the boy had gone some distance and entered a hollow, when they unexpectedly came upon the tiger lying on its side before them. Thinking it was dead, but to make certain, Stanley fired an LG into its rear, when the tiger came to life, turned round and charged them. As it leapt, Stanley fired his remaining barrel, this time ball, into the mouth of the tiger. Then it was on him, knocking him down and laying bare a portion of the back of his skull. At this moment the boy fled screaming, thus undoubtedly saving Stanley's life, for the tiger left him and chased the boy, whom in turn it sprang upon, biting into his side. Dazed from the wound in his head, Stanley scrambled to his feet and fumbled to reload his gun, when, unexpectedly, the tiger left the boy and jumped into the jungle,